Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned your subscription. And to everyone else who's watching, if you enjoy this video or get something from it, I would appreciate it if you would tap that thumbs up button. And if you'd like to help support the channel financially so I can continue making these videos, consider visiting eGuitarPlans.com. There's a link in the description below. Or you can visit my Highline Guitars merch store, which is displayed below the description for this video. Either way, your purchase is going to help support the channel financially and you're going to be getting something in return. So what I'm going to be talking about today is I have finally arrived at the last video in this series where I built the V-shaped guitar. It's going to be finished in this episode. So what I'm going to be doing is the last little bit of assembly and setup work, and I'll show you kind of what I do in that process. Now it's important to remember, every guitar that I build, the setup process can be a little bit different. There are some things that I need to do on some guitars and things that I don't need to do on other guitars. And it's really sort of a judgment call as I'm assembling the guitar and doing the setup and the test playing and that sort of thing. That process can reveal things that need to be done, or it may show that there are things I don't need to do because the guitar is perfectly fine as is. So that's kind of an explanation as to why you may see certain processes and may not see others. At the end of this video, I'm going to string along a little slideshow of still photos of the finished guitar up close so you can see what the guitar looks like in detail. And behind those photos, I'm going to have audio samples of the guitar being played, both clean and dirty. So be sure to stick around for that. That's something that I think you'll find interesting, and it'll give you an idea of how this guitar performs in terms of its tone and the way it sounds. So without further ado, let's jump in and get started. Now, as I mentioned in a previous episode, the bridge pickup ring was too tall for this guitar, so I had to replace it with a neck ring from a second set that I purchased. To keep the springs from popping out of the shorter bridge block on this tremolo, I used the included screws to secure those springs into place. To properly adjust the spring tension on the tremolo, I have to string and tune the guitar and then check to see if the bridge is sitting level to the rest of the body, which, as you can see here, it's not. So what I have to do is I have to play a dance where I adjust the claw by tightening those screws that hold the claw in place. And by tightening those screws, that increases the spring tension, which pulls the bridge down flatter to the body. Of course, you have to tune the strings after every time you adjust the claw, and you're going to go back and forth adjusting the claw, tuning the strings, and checking that bridge level until the bridge sits perfectly level and the strings are in tune. It's important to note that I will probably have to revisit these adjustments as I work through the setup process. For example, here I'm checking the action over the 12th fret, which, as you can see, is very high. So what I'll have to do is adjust that action to bring the strings down lower. And here I'm using my LMI digital string action gauge, which I find is a very useful tool for accurately determining what the distance is between the bottom of each string and the top of that 12th fret is. So once I have that, I can adjust the height of the bridge to bring it down lower so that the string action is correct. But once I do that, it's possible it's going to affect the spring tension. So I may have to go in and tweak that a little bit. But as I work through this process, those adjustments get smaller and smaller until you get to a point where there's really nothing left to adjust. Once I'm happy with the spring tension and the string action and all the strings are in tune, I can then lock down the strings at the nut. However, it's important to note that the guitar isn't precisely tuned yet. It's just coarsely tuned. So to get the strings tuned more precisely, that's what the fine tuners on the bridge are for. So by just making those adjustments, I can get the strings precisely tuned. Now you'll notice I'm using an iPhone with an app to tune the strings. If I was going to be keeping this guitar for myself, I would use a Peterson Strobo tuner to get it more precisely and accurately tuned. However, this guitar is going to get shipped, which means the guitar is probably going to go out of tune during the shipping process. In fact, I usually will loosen the strings before I ship a guitar to protect the neck. And once the new owner gets it, they'll be able to do the tuning themselves or take it to a luthier in their neighborhood and have it tuned for them. And as you'll see, focusing on precise tuning at this stage is to some degree a waste of time because, as you're going to see here in a minute, there's still more work to be done in the setup process. And what I'm going to do now is I'll sit with the guitar in the playing position and I'm going to play each string at every fret. I'm going to check the intonation. I'll play some chords. And what I'm looking for here is basically overall playability. I want to make sure that the guitar works correctly. I want to make sure that the string action is playable and easy to play. I want to make sure that there's no string buzz anywhere along the fretboard. And I just want to look for any possible problems that at this stage I can address before I box this guitar up. As I mentioned in a previous episode, I've already leveled the frets on this guitar, but I didn't crown, dress, or polish the frets at that stage because I wanted to wait and do that work until after I had the chance to string up and play the guitar as you see me doing here. If I had done that work earlier, it would have been a waste of time because I would likely have to redo it. There's always a possibility that I'm going to find some high spots on frets and I'm going to need to deal with those before I can crown and polish the frets. So there's no point in doing that work earlier. It's better to wait until after I've had a chance to play the guitar in the playing position, every string at every fret, to figure out if there's any issues that need to be addressed. And then once I've got through that phase, if by chance I find a high fret, I can deal with it now. But in this case, as I was playing this guitar, I didn't find any issues with high frets. So that means that when I leveled the frets previously, I was able to do a decent enough job that it didn't cause any problems. Plus, this neck, even though it doesn't have a truss rod, it's got 4 carbon fiber reinforcement rods, which keeps the neck very stable, even under string tension. So I have a slight amount of relief, about 0.010 of an inch at the 9th fret. And that's just about the right amount of relief for a guitar with this scale length that uses a tremolo. So I think that will work really well. But I didn't find any issues with string buzz as I was playing this guitar, and I was pretty happy with that. I was also very happy with how well the EMG pickups performed. There was no issues with the signal, so that worked out really well. So after test playing the guitar, I removed the strings and began the process of recrowning, dressing, and polishing the frets. And what you see me doing here is I'm masking off the fretboard, and I'm using binding tape for this. I really like to use binding tape for this purpose. In fact, I don't really use binding tape for binding since I rarely bind a guitar. But it's really strong, heavy-duty stuff and does a great job of protecting the frets. Then what I did was I grabbed my StewMag diamond-coated Z file and began the process of recrowning the frets. Next, I used a superfine fret dressing file just to soften the sharp edges and corners on the ends of each fret. Then I used a homemade sandpaper holding tool, which I used to sand out the tool marks left from the files that I used to recrown and dress the frets. And I'll work up from about 320 grit all the way up to as high as 1500 grit to get the surface really smooth and ready for polishing. Now, some guys like to polish their frets out to a mirror-like shine, and other guys don't. I can go either way, and for me it depends on the overall aesthetic of the guitar. If this was going to be a guitar that had a mirror-like, high-gloss, shiny finish, then I would probably be more inclined to polish the frets to a mirror-like shine. However, this guitar has a flat black finish, and I think that keeping the frets more of a satin sheen is more conducive to the look of this guitar. So instead of using like a Dremel with a buffing wheel and polishing compound to achieve that mirror-like shine, I'm just going to rub out the frets with various grits of synthetic steel wool. I never use actual steel wool here, because remember, a guitar has pickups that have magnets in them, and you never should use steel wool around magnets like that, because the particles from the steel wool can contaminate the pickup magnets, and it can affect the shape of the magnetic field and so on. So I just use Norton synthetic steel wool pads, and they're available from single-aught all the way up to 4-aught in grit, with the single-aught being the most coarse, and that's what I'm using right here. This is the red single-aught polishing pad, and you can go all the way up to, like I said, the 4-aught, which is the super fine, which is where I'll finish. And as you can see, I'm polishing both the frets and the fretboard at the same time. You might think that it would be advisable to mask off the fretboard to prevent the little particles of fret wire that are getting rubbed off with this process from contaminating the fretboard. However, this is a black fretboard. You can't see any contamination. If this was a maple fretboard, which is much lighter in color, I'd be more inclined to mask off the fretboard to prevent those particles from contaminating the surface of the maple. But that's not really an issue with a black fretboard. And later on I'm going to clean it anyway, so it shouldn't be a problem. But I'm going to work my way from the single-aught all the way up to the 4-aught synthetic steel wool, and that's going to give a really nice scratch-free satin finish to the frets and the fretboard. Every so often, a viewer will ask, what's the point of building a guitar, to going to all this trouble, when you can go into your local guitar shop or even online and purchase a guitar for around $100? Well, the difference between a $100 guitar and a $2,000 guitar is all the work that you see me putting in here. And I've edited this for time. So there's a lot that goes on that you don't see, and this is labor-intensive work, and they just don't do that on $100 guitars. I know that a lot of guys who are watching this video will aspire to one day owning a high-end $2,000 guitar. And what their thought process is that until the day they can afford that, they'll just be content with playing the cheap $100 guitar or the $300 guitar. But I think it's important to understand that your skill and ability is going to be determined by the quality of the instrument that you're playing. So if you're trying to learn to play guitar on a really cheap, poorly made $100 guitar, you're going to find that once you've stepped up to the higher end guitars, all of a sudden the doors start to open on what you're going to be capable of. So just keep that in mind. Now, once the frets have been polished to my liking, the last thing I want to do is apply 100% pure carnauba wax to the top of the fretboard. And as you can see, it darkens that fretboard and increases the contrast between the fretboard material, which is, as I mentioned before, Richlite, and the cast acrylic Curanite inlay that I put on the fretboard. So it really makes it look nice. And the nice thing about 100% pure carnauba wax with no other additives except for maybe mineral spirits to help make it applicable is that once it's dry, carnauba is the hardest wax known to man. So it provides a really good protective surface. And over time, every time that you change your strings, you can clean the fretboard and then just reapply some of that carnauba wax to make it just like new. After the wax is dried for a couple of hours or so, I'll restring the guitar, tune it up, and then I'm going to check the string action, the tuning, the intonation, and the spring tension once more. But usually by this stage, there's nothing else that I need to do. So I can proceed on with the last few steps in completing this guitar. And here I'm installing the control cavity cover. Now, a lot of guys will say, why don't you use magnets to attach your control cavity cover, your tremolo cover, and such? I use screws sort of as a deterrent because I don't want people who lack the skill and ability to start messing around in those cavities. If you use magnets, it's too easy and tempting to remove the cavities and start messing with stuff. Plus, every time you remove a cavity cover, you increase the potential for chipping the finish, and I want to try to avoid that. So I try to avoid gimmicks like using magnets to install my cavity covers. And of course, we can't forget the strap buttons. Now, the placement of the strap buttons has to do with both the weight distribution of the guitar, but also the playing style. And the two really don't go together. The weight distribution, the balance of the guitar may be such that you would place the strap buttons in one location, whereas your playing style may require that you place the strap buttons in a different location. So you have to figure out what is the best possibility. And with this guitar, I've determined that right under the neck heel on the body was the best place to put the front strap button. And then the rear strap button is placed on that upper point at the back and centered between the top and the back of the guitar's body. So, you know, if that turned out to be the wrong location, it could be easily moved to different ones, but then you have to go through the process of filling the holes and covering up the finish or doing a repair to the finish. But I think that this is really the best option for this particular design. It's good for both balance as well as playing style. And then the final touch on building this guitar is the installation of the tremolo bar. And with this Gato tremolo design, there is a small set screw which you can tighten to adjust how that tremolo bar swings back and forth. Okay guys, well, there you have it. The guitar is finished and it has already been sent off to its new owner. So I'm pretty happy with how this guitar turned out, and I'd be curious to see what you think as well. So post your thoughts down in the comments section below. Now, a lot of times, or what I've been trying to do in recent guitar builds, is when I finish, I like to do a follow-up video where I talk about what I learned during this build and things that I might do differently and that sort of thing. So I may try to do that for the next episode next week. We'll see how that goes. I've got a lot of stuff on my schedule, so it may be a little bit difficult to kind of cram that in. But I'm also thinking about the next project. And if you watch my channel on a regular basis, you may have seen some hints about that next project. And what it's going to be is an electric violin. Why an electric violin? Why not? I've always wanted to have an electric violin, and I thought this would be a great project. It's completely outside of what I normally do with my guitar builds, but I've found over the years that when you step a little bit outside of your box and start to do different projects, what you can learn and experience while building those projects can then help you improve your skills at what you do normally. So I found that was true when I built an acoustic several years ago. That whole effort really improved my skills at especially with regards to craftsmanship when building my solid body electric guitars. So I always recommend that you try some projects outside of what you normally do to help broaden your skill set. So yeah, that's the plan. So as always, I hope that you'll take care, stay safe, and that you'll be back for future episodes here on the Highline Guitars YouTube guitar building channel.